Disclaimer, I am a law student, and the legal information provided is not legal advice. For that, please hire an attorney. Hi, let's begin with a hypothetical. Let's say that you have a content creator who puts out a video to recent accusations of racism. And let's say that as one of their main arguments, what they say is the following. To be clear, I'm only sorta a racist. I don't believe we should enslave all black people. I just think as white people should, rough them up from time to time to show them who's boss. After this video goes live, several fans adopt those same beliefs and, acting on those beliefs, go out and murder several black people. 2 questions. First, is the content creator racist? And secondly, is the content creator responsible for the fans murdering those black people? Hey everyone, how's it going? So, it's a very morbid hypothetical. And I know, and I'm sorry. I have a feeling, so the hypothetical that we're using for today is actually, we'll be hearing about it a little bit more in particular in a little bit, because what's going to be happening is, for people who didn't look at my Twitter or my Instagram earlier and saw what we're going to be doing today, the first thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be debating someone who's reached out to me on multiple occasions, all right? This person, has represented herself as acting in good faith and just wanting to have a discussion. She's an Arielle Scarcella fan, all right? And she wants to come in, and she wants to come in because she's taken some issues with some of my recent videos and some of my recent takes about her. And, she went through the process of emailing me, and, I do check my email. So for people who want to debate me and go through all the requirements I have in my videos, it's a great way to do it, because that's how we get stuff like this happening. Now, we got there. So, how are you?
I'm doing well. Hold on, it looks like there's a...
Actually, that should work out just fine. It seemed... I didn't actually anticipate that Discord was going to be doing this. I use Discord as my stream chat, so it's what people are seeing. But people can see the both of us, so it seems to be working out just fine.
Okay. I have an echo right now. Should I close out my YouTube?
Yeah, you should close out YouTube.
Close out YouTube. Okay.
Yeah, because you're hearing both myself and the stream as it's being streamed through YouTube.
Okay, I still kind of hear a little bit of an echo on your end, so let me make sure everything else is
okay. Take your time.
Out. Nice music.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I remember I was hearing I always use the same music. I always use kind of lo-fi hip hop. It's it's weird because I specifically use it's non-trademark, or it's copyright-free music, right? That's uploaded to an independent site, but I always get copyright striked on my streams when they upload because of some third-party service. Yeah, so I just figured whatever. I'll just use whatever music is best suited for me, or whatever music I want to. So it's fine. But yeah, are you all good?
Yeah, I'm good. And I just wanted to come in here and saying thank you for allowing me to be on your stream. I think it's really cool that you're inviting people onto your platform who may or may not disagree with you. I think that's really awesome and big of you. So thanks. Yeah. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, no problem. So just like a couple preliminary matters, and then I'm going to turn it over to you because you emailed me and said you had some problems with my takes. So I'm going to let you lay out what those are. But I just figured if we could cover some preliminary matters before then I'll turn it over to you. Is that fine?
Okay.
Cool.
Sounds great.
Now, first things first, and I ask this usually of people, your pronouns are she, her, right?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, cool. Mine are as well. That's, all right, standard thing out of the way. Secondly, so I asked a hypothetical. I don't know if you heard it earlier. Did you hear the hypothetical that I introduced the stream with?
I did not.
You did not? Okay, so do you mind if I go ahead and just ask you?
I'm so sorry. Do you mind if we turn the music down just a little bit? I'm really nervous. This is my first time doing something like this, so I just want to...
Wait, turn what music down?
Make sure I can...
Chat, do you hear music? No one's hearing music right now.
Oh, maybe it's me then.
Yeah. No, the music is not on by me. Yeah, the chat does not know what music you're talking about.
So bizarre. Okay. Oh, okay. I figured out where it was coming from. I apologize. That was a extra window I had open.
You're all good. So do you mind if I ask you that opening hypothetical and just to see how you like deal with certain subjects? Okay. So let's say that you have a content creator who puts out a video responding to recent accusations of racism. One of their main arguments when they put out that video is to say the following. To be clear, I'm only sorta a racist. I don't believe we should enslave all black people. I just think that us white people should, rough them up a little bit from time to time to show them who's boss. After this video goes live, several fans adopt those same beliefs and, acting on those beliefs, go out and murder several black people. So 2 questions. First, would you say that that content creator is racist? And second, is the content creator responsible for the fans of that content creator going out and murdering those black people?
So does this content creator advocate for going out and murdering black people and have openly expressed that?
I'm only the facts and the hypothetical are known. They've only said, at least for consideration here, that I don't believe we should enslave all black people. I just think us white people should rough them up from time to time to show them who's boss. That's all that we know at this point.
Yeah, I don't agree with that sentiment. Yeah.
So hold on. Let's go through that one time. So do you agree that this content creator is racist?
I think what they're saying is pretty racist.
So you would, all right. So the question is like, do you agree that this person, like a person who says that they're only sorta a racist and that we should go out and enslave all black, or we shouldn't go out and enslave all black people, just rough them up to show them who's boss. Are you saying they're racist or that they're not? Or are you specifically saying that the things that they're saying are racist? Like you can clarify however you feel.
Yeah, the things that they're saying are racist. Yeah, this is a tough question because, like, what's the context surrounding that? Not that there's any good context like ever.
This is the only context that's known.
I would probably be like, yeah, that person has some pretty racist tendencies, and I would not associate myself with them.
Okay, but you would not say that person is responsible because, mind you, in the hypothetical, the people who went out and murdered those black people did so after adopting the beliefs in this video. So you would not say that the content respect. So are you saying that the content creator is? No. You're not saying not that content.
No, okay. I think people are responsible for their own actions individually.
Okay. Yeah, that's all. I just wanted to see how you thought about certain things. Yeah. I expect that line of thought will probably come up later, but I just want to see how you think about it. Okay. The next thing is I want to get through like the distinction between objective and subjective analysis. Do you know what those are?
I mean, I think objective analysis is, let me give you an example. I'm an artist, so I might be speaking in examples a lot because it's just the way my brain works. Like, let's say somebody looks at the sky and the sky is blue. Everybody can objectively agree that the sky is blue because everybody in their mind has the same definition of what blue is. So like it's pretty straightforward.
Necessarily. There are colorblind people.
That's true. Although color can still be detected, like based on like wavelengths and stuff.
Okay.
So like you can say like
that makes more sense to me.
Yeah. Like it's observable. Like it's you can scientifically observe it, and it'll always have that same answer, that same output each time. Subjective, I feel like objective, it's not so clean and cut. There's many different perspectives that you can look at something. For example, like within art, you can look at a picture of a flower. One person might see a flower, and because like the art piece is super abstract, someone else might see, I don't know, an elephant. Like it's not as clean cut. It can't always be true 100% of the time, and a lot of the times it's up to the individual and how they interpret it. It doesn't exist outside of the individual, I guess. Is what.
Yeah. No, I mean, like I'm inclined to agree with all that. So just to be clear, right? And I don't necessarily disagree with anything that you just said, right? These types of analyses are discussed in the law, and that's usually how I look at these sorts of issues, right? Objective analysis is being able to evaluate a question based on objective criteria that exists regardless of people's opinions on certain matters, right? Like objectively, empirically observable phenomena based on criteria or given elements, usually like is the term in the law. But like if you're able to meet elements X, Y, and Z, then you can come to such a conclusion. It also has to do with like deductive reasoning, right? So if you can conclude things 1, 2, and 3, then you can come to a conclusion with absolute certainty, right? So that's objective analysis, right? Subjective analysis, like you said, yeah, it's more personal. You know, it goes more to try, but in this sense, right, what I'm specifically talking about is trying to discern what someone believes. A lot of people say that there's overlap between this and inductive reasoning, right? Based on, you know, whatever factors we're using to define, right? You can become to a degree certain what someone believes, right? Based on things that they do or say. Now, I don't really care all that much for subjective analysis because I'm not a mind reader. I can never be 100% sure what someone believes. If someone tells me one thing, then their actions might say something completely different, right? So when I address these sorts of questions about what other people do and what they believe, I don't really care what other people believe per se. I care about their actions and the effect, the material effect that those actions have on the world around them and, you know, in our world. Does that make sense?
That does make sense, Riley. That does make sense. Shoot, I don't know if we're just gonna like jump into it, but I guess like in the case of Arielle Scarcella.
Well, yeah. I mean, like I'm just asking if you're clear. I mean, like I'm gonna turn this over to you and let you take over in a second. Okay, that makes sense. So the last thing that we can define, because we're probably gonna get into it. Do you want to try and define like what transphobia is, or what does transphobia mean to you?
Certainly. I would define transphobia as a fear or hatred towards people on the full basis that they are trans and nothing more.
And nothing more?
And nothing more. Like, well, I mean, I believe that there's different levels of transphobia, you know? Like, I feel like there's like some people who are like, oh my gosh, I want to kill all trans people. My concern is that I see even disagreeing or critiquing of certain ideas that are coming out of the trans community being called transphobia. And the reason I say that is because I think we can all agree that transphobia is a bad thing. That's not something we want in our society. However, I get worried when I see certain ideas being called like transphobic or TERF rhetoric simply for the fact that that particular person does not agree with an idea that might come out of the trans community.
No, and I hear that, right? And so I suppose that the reason that I asked was because I want to make sure that what we're doing, going back to the distinction between objective and subjective analysis, I want to make sure that we are using an objective definition of what transphobia means, right? Because there are, like I have on my stream, a number of different definitions, and a lot of them do certainly match up to what you said, right? Like some of them are, like, for example, according to Merriam-Webster, transphobia is defined as an irrational fear of or aversion to or discrimination against transgender people, right? Another one describes it as unreasoning hostility, aversion, etc. towards transgender people, and it goes on, right? Now, I agree. Now, you know, like I do agree that transphobia can certainly encompass beliefs, but what I focus on, again, because we're, you know, looking at people's opinions objectively, because if we don't, we'll never know for sure if anyone, like, we can never know with absolute
you're trying
certainty
to make sure we're on the same page, so like we can have a straightforward debate.
Right.
I got you.
So I am going to propose, based on the aforementioned definitions, and I can go through them all if you want to, but I would say that a definition of transphobia that's operative, that is objective, is that a transphobic action is any action which has a materially adverse effect on a trans person or group of trans people by virtue of the fact that they are transgender. Is that acceptable?
Yes, I think it is. So what you're saying is I can be like one trans person and there's like an adverse effect happening on me based on this other person's actions. What if it's only affecting me and not any other trans people?
Well, I mean,
would that still be considered transphobic?
I mean, if
Simply
it's affecting you,
affecting me and I'm a trans person?
if it's affecting you by virtue, if you are trans and it's affecting you by virtue of the fact that you're trans, right? So, for example, like misgendering someone, if someone misgenders someone, then that will negatively affect a trans person by virtue of the fact that they are trans. It probably won't affect a cis person, right? Like if I accidentally call like the average person in society, or I don't know, it depends on how sensitive people are, right? But if I accidentally misgender like the average person, like I would be willing to bet that most people won't be as affected by it as a trans person because there's that distinction in lived experience. But I would call it a transphobic action, regardless of intent, right? I'm not saying that the person is necessarily transphobic. We're just looking at the actions, but like it is something which is transphobic in and of itself. Okay. So that's basically what I'm looking at, right? That's basically how I'm evaluating whether an action is transphobic. All right. I think that's really all the main things I wanted to get to preliminarily. So, all right. If you want to, you can start taking over. So what problems do you have with what I have said? Dude. The floor is yours.
Yeah, so it's funny because like I took a bunch of notes on this, but I think I'm just gonna speak from like what I understand. Okay. So I'd like to give a little bit of context about myself first, just to explain where I'm coming from.
Okay.
So I am 28. When I was younger, in a lot of ways, I did identify as a boy. Okay. I have a distinct memory of being like 5 or 6 years old. I always had my hair short. And I remember meeting my best friend in elementary school, and they said something jokingly like, "Oh, I thought you were a boy when I first met you." And I didn't take that offensively. I was like, "Oh, cool." You know, like I also went to a very openly liberal school growing up. We had a lot of gay teachers. We actually had a transgender music teacher. So that world has always been something that I've been exposed to. Okay. I would say that as I've gotten older, you know, I kind of grew out like those boyish feelings, and okay. I've never really sat and thought about like what makes me a woman. Like I've always kind of identified like my womanhood and my femaleness based on the fact that I was born like with a vagina, uterus, ovaries, and how that affects me physically and how society sees me around me. So that's kind of always been my understanding of it growing up. However, I remember when Isis King came on America's Next Top Model, shout out to Isis, you know, I started to find myself getting more interested in the trans discussion. I think mostly out of curiosity, mostly because I did have that situation when I was a kid.
Can I ask you a clarification? So are you someone who has ever transitioned? Because what you're like, I'm unaware if you are someone who like identifies trans and tried transitioning and you detransition, or if you're just someone who flirted around with some of those feelings growing up. So can you clarify?
Yeah, I flirted around with some of those feelings growing up. I've never transitioned.
Okay, please continue.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, just to give you context of YouTubers I've been following for the past couple years, Blair White, Calvin Guerra, Arielle
we just had Calvin on here the other night.
Yeah, I saw that. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so like, you know, I've seen all these different conversations being thrown around, and I guess my concern is I feel like with Arielle, I personally, maybe we can disagree about how she's going about it, but I personally agree with a lot of the things she says. But I also think that there's a lot of miscommunication that's happening from both sides. It's just confusing everybody. So I guess, I mean, Riley, I think you're incredibly smart. You seem like a really cool person. I don't really have any issues with you. I would say the critique I have is stating that she's objectively wrong.
Well, she is.
About a lot of the things she says. I don't think she is.
Okay, well then, you know, go into your arguments. Tell me where you think that I have said that she is objectively wrong and where you disagree with me.
Certainly. So I feel like a lot of this debate revolves around language. You know, so I can relate to Arielle in the sense that she was born female, or if you want to say assigned female at birth, growing up, she had masculine tendencies. She, you know, thought she was a boy for a minute because of her sexuality, and then eventually she just grew to realize that she's a lesbian. I see the word female being redefined, and it's, I guess I get like her frustration behind that.
Well, I mean,
let me just start off by saying that.
Well, all right, hold on. First off, are you specifically talking to, like, I asked you what problems you have with what criticisms I have made of her, and I have yet to hear one. So are you getting to one, or do I need to redirect you?
Yeah, so thank you for directing me through this. Yeah, I would say my criticism of her is that, or of you in regards to her, is that you're stating that she's objectively wrong when she has made statements that, in my opinion, are objectively true. It's just she uses maybe a particular language that you might not recognize.
Okay, well, what statements are you talking about? Like, what arguments are you specifically referring to? I've made this claim against her on multiple issues. What are you talking about?
Okay, give me one moment. I'm just gonna pull up some examples.
Yeah, please take your time.
So I would say that I agree with her on the trans sports debate. I agree with her for the terms male and female being other denoting of the sex to produce eggs or ova, or other denoting of the sex that produces sperm. I mean, I believe that women as a class are inherently oppressed based on the nature of our biological sexual reproductive functions. I believe that depending on how you were born, it's there, like you have either male socialization or female socialization if you've lived as that particular birth gender for most of your life and then transitioned later in life. Does that help, I guess?
Sure, so let's take some of those. Or do you have more? I mean, like, you can go, and I'm taking notes right now.
Okay, sure. I do believe that in some instances, I'm trying to be careful of the language I use. Like, cis female issues do clash with issues. I do agree with that. And I guess, like, mostly, like, I just kind of, like, I agree with her points, and I disagree with, I guess, the way she's been treated in reference to those points. Like, I haven't seen a lot of people be like, hey, you're right about this, but what if you think about this idea? It's always been like, you're wrong, you're a transphobe, you're a TERF, and just completely and utterly attacking her and giving her no credibility whatsoever. Like, I don't think she can be wrong about absolutely everything she says. And I think that's where I come in when you say it's subjectively wrong, that's like...
I never said that.
Like, I never said she's objectively wrong.
I said she is objectively wrong. You said subjectively.
Oh, I meant to say objectively.
Okay.
I apologize. So,
okay, well, I can take some of those arguments immediately. On the biological sex one. So first, let me be clear. There's sort of like two issues on this, right? The first is, does biological sex determine someone's gender? This also has to do with the what defines womanhood, right? So according to the American...
That it doesn't.
Well, then let's talk about that. According to the American Psychological Association, gender identity refers to a person's internal sense of being male, female, or something else. Gender expression refers to the way that a person communicates gender identity to others through behavior, clothing, hairstyles, voice, or body characteristics. Furthermore, according to the United Nations, according to the United Kingdom's National Health Service, gender identity is defined to refer to our sense of self, or who we are and how we describe ourselves. The NHS explains that most people identify as male or female, which are sometimes called binary identities, but some people feel their gender identity is different from their biological sex. Furthermore, according to the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, gender refers to the societally constructed roles, behaviors, expressions, and identity of girls, women, boys, men, and gender diverse people. It influences how people perceive themselves and each other, how they act and interact, and the distribution of power and resources in society. Gender identity is not confined to a binary, girl/woman, or boy/man, nor is it static. It exists along a continuum and can change over time. There is considerable diversity in how individuals and groups understand, experience, and express gender through the roles they take on, the expectations placed on them, relations with others, and the complex ways that gender is institutionalized in society. The analysis of all of this conclusive empiric data is that gender identity and gender expression are not mutually inclusive with one's biological identity, and therefore biological sex does not determine someone's gender. That's the majority scientific consensus.
I mean, I agree with that, and I think Arielle does too.
Well, you just said that biological sex is, or that gender is determined by whatever biological identity you have, or do you not maintain that belief? No, you don't.
I that's not what I think. I don't. I think that sex and gender are separate.
Okay.
I think gender is exactly what you stated it is. And I think Arielle does too.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
That's what's kind of confusing me here.
Okay, I mean, like if we agree on that, then we can move on to the next point of that argument.
Okay.
Okay, so let me see if I can send you this graph, because I have a picture I can just show you right now.
You know, I'm an artist. I love those visuals.
You're all good. Let's see.
This makes everything easier to understand.
I believe I have this here. Video projects, camera roll. Here we go. Okay. Can you access the voice chat in the interview and the debate room? Are you able to see what I post in there?
Hashtag voice chat.
Yeah, and hashtag voice chat.
Okay.
All right. So you're looking at what I just sent, or what I just posted in there? Okay, cool. So what?
The last post I said was, or I see was made on yesterday. It was made yesterday.
Well, you just saw. All right, I just posted in there.
I see it.
Okay. So here. All right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this for a second. So here's a graphic from Scientific American describing the many characteristics which factor into one's sexual identity. This shows the ambiguous and bimodal nature of sex, and that sex is not as simple as XX and XY.
Can I pause you for a second?
No, I'm going to finish. Biological sex is on a bimodal distribution, not a direct binary. Another publication in Scientific American elaborates on this subject. Sex is supposed to be simple, at least at the molecular level. The biological explanations that appear in textbooks amount to X plus X equals girl, and X plus Y equals boy. Venus or Mars, pink or blue. As science looks more closely, however, it becomes increasingly clear that a pair of chromosomes do not always suffice to distinguish boy-girl, either from the standpoint of sex, biological traits, or of gender, social identity. To varying extents, many of us are biological hybrids of a male-female continuum. Researchers have found that XY cells in a 94-year-old woman, and surgeons discovered a womb in a 70-year-old man, a father of 4. New evidence suggests that even the brain consists of mosaic cell types, some more yin, others further along on the yang scale. Additionally, here's a quote from a publication in Sage Journals of the modern scientific attitudes on human sex. Quote, "The view that the world's population can be separated into a clearly defined dyadic unit of male and female is defunct. Not only clinical observations, but molecular biology has established that sexual identity is on a continuum with an enormous potential for variance. Additionally, according to the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, sex refers to a set of biological attributes in humans and animals. It is primarily associated with physical and physiological features, including chromosomes, gene expressions, hormone levels and function, and sexual / reproductive anatomy. Sex is usually categorized as male or female, but there is variation in the biological attributes that comprise sex and how those attributes are expressed. The analysis of all of this modern scientific consensus is that binary terms like biological male and biological female are scientific fiction. This is because since biological sex is on a spectrum, when we choose when to label someone as biologically male or biologically female, that's determined by society. There's no inscription on the chromosomes or whatever you're looking at that says boy or girl. So when you attempt to present societally constructed terms as empiric authority, it is scientific fiction. And that's why I would say that you cannot categorize really anyone as biologically male or biologically female, because we exist on a bimodal distribution according to the modern scientific consensus. All right, so do you want to respond?
So I want to ask you this. How do you define sexual identity, and what do you mean when you say that sexuality is on a continuum? I just want to make sure I'm understanding you.
I'm just going according to the modern scientific consensus that sexual identity exists on a bimodal distribution. That's shown by the graph that I sent you. What that means is that sexual identity exists on a continuum, most people ending up in what society would deem as boy or girl, man or woman. But it's important to acknowledge that because there is a spectrum, when we choose arbitrarily who is a boy or a girl, that's not decided by science. That's decided by society, right? And that's what it means when we say that gender is societally constructed. And so when we try to say that someone is biologically male or biologically female, the science just doesn't support that. Does that make sense?
Well, I think that does make sense. And this is kind of where I bring up the issue with language. I don't think man means male, and I don't think female means woman.
Okay,
cool. Regarding the gender stuff, I completely agree with you. However, regarding the whole idea that biological sex is complete fiction, I'm going to disagree with you, and here's why.
Well, I'm not disagreeing. I'm not saying that. Hold on. You're misrepresenting me. I didn't say that biological sex is fiction. I said that biological male and female are. Biological sex exists on a continuum. It exists on a bimodal distribution. Yeah. It is real. But when we choose where to label people as man or woman, boy or girl, that is dictated by society. That's what my argument is, and that's based on the that's based on the scientific evidence.
Okay, I still disagree that biological male and biological female don't exist. I feel like that's like saying because orange exists, therefore yellow and I don't know, red don't exist. You know, like just because
I don't get
there's
the analogy.
Exceptions does not mean that, like, you know, of course there's intersex people, there's XY females, there's XX
I'm just telling you what the modern majority scientific consensus is. I'm not arguing prescriptively. You're arguing prescriptively. I'm telling you what the modern majority scientific consensus is. Like, this is not a debated subject. This is an open shut case.
I mean,
like when you're disagreeing with it, you are disagreeing with people who study this, who dedicate their entire lives to studying this phenomenon.
I think like Calvin Guerra brought up a brilliant point in your stream yesterday, which is this a consensus because it's purely fact and that's it, or that's just kind of the way we're feeling like going with society right now? I literally cited you like over 5 different reputable sources. Unless you're saying that there's a giant conspiracy among modern academia to like push a specific narrative, then that's not gonna exactly fly. Right. I think you're misunderstanding what I'm saying now. What I'm saying is that when I say biological males exist and biological females exist, what I mean is like XY males who are born with penis, scrotum, whatever, exist. Like they exist, and so do females who are born with like.
No, I'm not disagreeing that there aren't men and I'm not disagreeing that men and women don't exist. But when we were deciding arbitrarily that people with X, Y, and Z, hold on, I'm gonna finish responding. That when we decide that people with XY. When we decide that people with XYZ features are a boy and people with XYZ features are a girl, then that is dictated arbitrarily by society. That's the scientific consensus. And I'm sorry if you disagree with that. Like, we're agreeing that there are men and women. We also agree that, like, trans women are women, trans women are men, because there are people who fall outside those definitions. Right?
That's fine. But, like, yeah, I agree. But, like, hear what you said just there. Just now I said, you know, there are X females who exist that have, like, vagina, ovaries, or whatever, and then there's XY males that exist that have
there are also women who exist who have XY chromosomes and penises.
Hold on, let me finish, girlie.
Okay, go ahead.
And then right from there, you said, yeah, like those people exist, but that doesn't necessarily make them men or women. Like you went from me, like I'm talking about.
Well, they are men and women. It's because
male and women.
They are men and women. I'm not saying that they aren't. I'm just saying that they are because we as a society have decided that based on.
Gender,
Well, that is what we're talking about, though, because when we're looking at like the biological sex continuum, that can't tell us whether or not someone's a man or a woman. That just tells us what traits they have on the sexual continuum.
Yeah, and your sex are based on what traits you have. It's completely disconnect from however you identify in your head. It's how you sexually reproduce.
Well, yeah, exactly. So gender, when you're whether or not you're a man or a woman, is dictated by society, and your sex, while often there is overlap between these two categories, does not determine what gender or sex that you are. Or at least when you try to say that someone is a biological male or biological female, that is scientific fiction, because you're trying to impose culturally invented terms onto something that does not reflect that descriptively.
Well, what do you think people mean when they say biological male or biological female?
I think that they're trying to say that because you have XY chromosomes or XX chromosomes that you're a man or a woman, which is not the scientific consensus.
So I'm someone who uses those terms in my day-to-day life, and that's not what we mean when we use them.
Okay, well then tell me how you mean it.
Yeah, and I'm going to say this because I think Arielle means it in the same way as well.
Hold on. We're not talking subjectively. We're not talking subjectively. We're not speculating about what she believes, all right? So don't try to speculate or say what you think that she says or what you think she believes. If she says something or she said something before, we can talk about that. Don't try and guess what she means when she says certain things.
I mean, I'm fairly confident I understand what
you're fairly confident. Are you? Hold on. Are you a mind reader?
No, I just noticed the pattern in the things that she keeps.
Well, then talk about specific instances
and, like,
where she says something.
To how I understand it, it makes logical sense. Okay, but going back to the question, where when someone says someone's a biological male or a biological female, they mean like what sex they are by nature, like what gametes their body naturally produces. Like, you know, if you leave like hormones or whatever out of it, like the direction their body would naturally develop as.
All right, then
it was just
I'm sorry, but that's wrong. I'm sorry to tell you, but that's wrong. I just read you the modern scientific consensus, and that goes in direct contradiction to that. I don't know what more to tell you. Like, you can keep saying that this is what people believe, but this is what like scientists and like studies show to be true. All right, if you want to keep going on about like what you believe to be true, like it's not scientific. If it is inconsistent with that.
So it's wrong to say that like when someone says biological males, what they mean is someone who is born with a penis, scrotum.
That is scientific. Yeah, based on what we just talked about, that is scientific fiction, because you're trying to impose binary categories onto a bimodal distribution. You're trying to impose a binary. You're trying to impose a binary onto a system that does not allow it. And so when you do it, it's just wrong.
Why can't there be biological males, biological females, and then other people outside of that?
You're talking prescriptively. I'm not talking about prescriptively. I'm not talking about what should be true. I'm talking about what is true. All right? I'm not talking about what should be true. Why can't we have this, that, or the other? Well, the reason is because it's just not what the science is. That's it. I'm not talking from like what I want to be true.
I'm not a biological female.
That term is not scientific. You're a person who has a lot of characteristics which fall along a certain part of this bimodal distribution, and because of the aggregate of those, society determines you to be a woman. That would be the accurate way to say it.
Okay, I think I'm starting to understand you now, actually.
Okay.
So you're saying that by using these terms, we're limiting like the amount of sexual variation there is in nature.
I mean, like, to an extent, but I mean, I'm more just talking from like what the consensus is. That's my main angle from it. Like, that's an argument that you could certainly take from what I'm saying, but I'm just arguing the consensus.
I guess in my next question would be like, how would I define myself then? Because I think that's the struggle that comes from, you know, us giving up the word female, so to speak. There's literally no other words I can use to define myself.
Well, I mean, like,
when I'm trying to talk about like all my traits.
Well, you can. I mean, like, all right, so a couple of things, right? So, like, I'm not taking away, you mentioned that, you know, women as a class are oppressed based on, like, sexual characteristics. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with that. Now, I disagree sometimes when people try to make a distinguishment between, like, trans and cis women when they do that, because I would make a similar argument for trans women. But, like, based on, like, your sexual characteristics, like, yeah, society generally, because society recognizes you as a woman based on those characteristics, yeah, like, women have faced oppression because of it. It's just important to recognize that like society, it's because society recognizes you as a woman for having those traits that women face oppression because of them. Does that make sense? So like, I'm not taking away the label of woman. Like, I'm not at all taking away the label of womanhood. That's not what I am trying to do. I'm just trying to be as accurate and descriptive as I possibly can be. Because when we use certain limiting terms, kind of like what like what you suggested earlier, then we end up like naturally descriptively being wrong and prescriptively leaving out certain people who otherwise do face very similar forms of oppression by society. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah. Just wanted to say thank you for like being really kind during this debate. I know like it got heated there for a minute, but yeah, I mean like, I think we actually do kind of, yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, like I told I'm totally willing to like talk and, lead people through discussions if people are acting in good faith.
Yeah.
And I've so far, for the most part, gotten that impression from you. So yeah, I'm willing to work. I'm willing to talk with you. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Shoot, I lost my point. But I think we actually agree on a lot of what you're saying. It's just, okay, now how do we like formulate this in a way that fits into society? Because I mean, we can look at literally every rule that there is in nature, and there's always an exception. There just always is. Something's always going to like fall astray or out of the category. So the question is like, okay, how do we orchestrate society in a way that works for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, I can
totally interrupt. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. If you're still going, go ahead.
Yeah. I was gonna say like, I don't want to like dissuade from the point, so bring me back if I end up doing that. But going back to Arielle Scarcella, I feel like a lot of her fear and like a lot of the things she says is not like it's not coming from a place of hate. Like it's coming from her desire to protect.
Now again, I want to
earth-bodied individuals who are like her, and like.
Again, I'm trying to like you're getting into subjective analysis. I really want to make clear. I'm not trying to guess what Arielle believes. I'm not trying to guess what her motivations are. I'm just evaluating what she says. Okay? Because like we're not mind readers, we can't know with certainty what she believes.
That's fair.
Yeah, like I understand that you think that you know what she does, and you might very well like have a better idea than most people. Maybe you have like a better idea than the average person. All right, I'll concede that, but like it doesn't tell us anything conclusively. So I really don't want to get bogged down into like effectively what is a difference of opinions, because you can sit there and say what you believe about her. I can sit here and say what I believe about her, and we can't get anywhere. So if we could just like I'm fine with like if you have examples of her saying things that would lead you to believe this, then I think that would be better. But like I want to focus on the things that she says and does. Is that fine?
Yeah, that's fine.
Anyway, I'm sorry I didn't.
Yeah.
If we want, I wrote down the points that you made at the beginning. If you want me to return to those and address those some more. All right.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. So depending on how you're born and society will affect your socialization. I don't disagree with that, right? I don't think that really anyone disagrees with that. I was certainly socialized in a way that's different from a lot of other women in society, right? Like I agree with that. I just don't think like the thing that I want to make sure is that that's not like the end all be all for what determines like how someone is treated gender wise, right? Like I would make the argument that like, it doesn't really matter what I was in the past, at least as far as determining what my gender is, right? Like I'm a woman today. I'm treated as a woman in literally every single aspect of my life when I go out and interact with other people, right? Like I don't disagree that I was socialized differently, but like every woman, every person is socialized differently, right? Like there's no one clear-cut way that a person is socialized in society, right? So I don't know if there's anything that you want to say on there, but I mean, like, I don't necessarily disagree with that point. I just disagree with like how it's taken to sometimes imply that, like, usually the way I see this implied is that because, like, if we're talking about trans women or men, because they were not socialized in the way with their gender identity growing up, that somehow invalidates their identity later on. Like, that's how I often see that argument used, right? I don't disagree with it on, like, with the basic argument that we were socialized differently on its merits. I disagree when it's used in that way. Does that make sense?
That makes absolute sense, and I agree. Let me ask you this question because, like I said, I'm kind of like a cis person looking in. Yeah. I see. Sometimes I I don't know, like I see like all these different like things that are being said like within the trans community. I'm like, to the point where it's like, okay, does this person think this, or does this person think that? Do they all think this? Do they all think differently? So this is just like me just trying to understand, especially after like the whole XX debate. Like, do you think before you transition, and I say this in good faith, that you were in any way male?
So, all right, this is where I am probably going to disagree with some people. This is an ongoing debate, but I feel pretty confident, at least, because again, like, you can look at this either subjectively or objectively. Subjectively, was I a woman? Well, that's a difference in opinion, right? Objectively, I was seen and treated as a man in society, right? Like, and again, like, this is going to differ between people, right? I would still maintain that I was trans because I felt dysphoria, and like, I felt the things which would normally lead a person to come out and transition, right? Like, I certainly felt those things.
Do you identify as being male and then transitioning into female?
I think that if we're acting descriptively, like objectively, then like I was, again, like, and I have to think more about this, but just going off of what I know, I would say that I was a guy at one point in my life and I transitioned, and now I'm living and seen as a woman and am a woman.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense. And I'm glad you cleared that up because, you know, like everyone's story is different. And,
right. Now I will.
Yeah, I guess I know where you were coming.
Yeah. So, now I will clear the air a little bit because this is something that's, you know, that's talked about a lot, right? Actually, Natalie Wynn, ContraPoints, has a good video on this. And so here's basically where I want to make a caveat, right? Because there are people watching me who are trans, who are authentically trans, feel dysphoria, or, you know, for whatever reason identify as trans and feel strongly attached to that label, and who are unable to, right? Now, I want to say that, like, just because someone isn't able to like, again, like, when you have gender being something which is expressed through society, you get into some weird wishy-washy circumstances on the internet, right? Like, I might also similarly make the case that when you have when you go online and you have a person who says to other people, like in a trans-friendly space, hey, I am a woman, I go by she, her pronouns, please refer to me as such, and the people in that area like acknowledge that and reciprocate that, then I might, and again, like this is just kind of going off of literature and exploring a little bit, but I might make the argument that that person is a woman in that space, right? Because they are treated as a woman by the people around them, right? Whereas like and also going along with this line of thinking, I would say that this is also the reason why it sucks so much to be misgendered, because if gender expression is really kind of like, you could think of it sort of like a handshake between you and the people around you, right? It's like an acknowledgement that because of factors X, Y, and Z, the people around you acknowledge and see you as a woman or a man or whatever you are, right? So like when someone misgenders me, it's kind of like spitting in that handshake, right? It's kind of like, hey, I actually don't see you as who you are. Fuck you. I'm not going to acknowledge you as that, right? And I would make the case that's the reason why it hurts, right? Because it is sort of like invalidating our gender, you know? Like it's essentially saying that despite whatever you might be saying right now, or despite what you're representing to me, I am going to treat you as something else. So I would make the argument, but again, like this is currently it is something which is currently debated in the trans community. But I try to stay away from subjective analysis because, again, it's a difference of opinion, right? That's why I try to focus on objectivity, which, for better or worse, means that, you know, at one point in my life, I was living as a guy. We all do things that we're not proud of. You know, it's unfortunate. But I would also maintain that doesn't invalidate who I am now, because I am now treated and I live as a woman, and I have been for like forever, right? I mean, like I'm basically fully legalized, like legally and socially transitioned at this point.
Well, you look great. So.
Oh my God, thank you, and same to you, right? I really appreciate it. But yeah, so that's essentially my take. I'm not sure if that clears it up or makes it hard, or if that made it more complicated. But this is certainly you're right in saying that it is certainly an open discussion that's happening.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That definitely does clear it up. And like I mean, of course, I have like nothing to say against that, like whatsoever. Like that's your story.
Okay.
If you want, this is like kind of going back.
Sorry. Go on.
I think like. No problem. I think this is where, I don't know, and then this is like what I see happening that's just unfortunate is I feel like your story should be able to be like expressed and discussed, and like on the same coin, you know, like I don't know, like I've had people tell me in my life that because I identify like my own womanhood as like, you know, like me being born female and having female anatomy and growing up that such, like in that way, like that I'm reducing myself to like just like my reproductive organs and things of that nature. Like it's tough because it's like I mean, I see you as a woman, Riley. I'm just going to throw that out there. But it's, you know, like I think going back to like subjective and like differences of opinion, it's like, where do we draw the line when it comes to how we set up society and legislate identities? You know what I mean? Like,
oh, well, so are you talking about like laws? Like this is, I just want to be clear if that's what you're talking about when you say legislate.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm going with it because, you know, like I mean, I see you as a woman, like your identity as a woman makes sense to me, but you know, there's also other people out there that'll just say that they're a woman simply because they identify as one despite having literally no experience of like walking around the world being perceived as female. And it's like if I met that person in real life, would I respect their identity? Of course I would. But like, I also, like this kind of goes to No Offense's video I was watching where he was saying like, your identity is determined by how other people around you see you. And he says that that's not true. But in a social setting, I feel like it kind of is. You know, I do feel like there's a societal perspective to how you are viewed, and some of the discussions that I see coming out of the trans community completely validate that and say like, no, like it's just simply how you identify and nothing more. And I think that's another issue that I see, and I'm curious to know your thoughts on it.
Okay, so here's the thing about it, right? Because I mean, like now we are sort of getting into my, you know, my this is my arena, right? Like trans studying law, you know. So first, as like a policy matter for law, right? Like the law does not have to say anything about like, or the law doesn't have to say something about every single thing in society, right? Like usually the law comes in the John Stuart Mill sense, where the imposition of a law or a restriction can be done in order to maximize the liberties of other people, right? Namely, that usually comes into effect when it's about like preventing harm to others, you know? That's usually where laws are introduced. And in this sense, usually when people are talking about laws being placed in regards to the trans community, like for the most part, it's bathroom bills. Like that's the, like, unless you can tell me, like, if you want to talk about like other examples, then we can talk about them. But like for the most part, would you agree with me that for the most part it's like bathroom bills nowadays? Like if there are other examples, then we can go over them as well. But like
yeah.
For the most part, this is usually the only law that's discussed.
Sure. I'm glad you brought this up. Yeah, with bathroom bills, well, I mean, just the way bathrooms are set up, they're stalls. Like, I mean, well, I think, you know, trans people should be allowed to use the bathroom of the gender they identify with. Absolutely. I agree with that. Now, I think like the question, like maybe an even better question would be, how do I feel about locker rooms? Because that's where I get,
Well,
I think that's where like,
So we want to talk about this. So there's actually, like, mind you, I understand a lot of people, like there's a lot to talk about with this, but there have actually been studies on this, right? Specifically, there have been studies to the effect of are concerns about like trans predators in bathrooms, changing rooms, etc., like an empirically validated danger, right? Is this something which regularly happens and which we as a society need to address as an issue? And secondly, like what is the public opinion on like trans people in bathrooms and changing rooms, right? So on the first point, in a 2018 study In 2018, a study was published in the Journal of Sexuality Research and Social Policy, which discusses how legislation, regulations, litigation, and ballot propositions affecting public restrooms access for transgender people increased drastically in the last 3 years, and how opponents of gender identity inclusive public accommodations, non-discrimination laws often cite fear of safety and privacy violations in public restrooms if such laws are passed, while proponents argue that such laws are needed to protect transgender people and concern safety and privacy violations are unfounded. What the study found was that there's no empirical evidence that has been gathered to test such laws' effects, and furthermore, that this study provides evidence that fears of increased safety and privacy violations as a result of non-discrimination laws are not empirically grounded. Furthermore, according to Rain, most rapes and sexual assaults, specifically 8 out of 10, are committed by someone a victim knows, not random men and women claiming to be transgender women in the bathroom. And furthermore, according to a study conducted by the British National Centre for Social Research, a vast majority of cis women are not, in fact, concerned about which facilities transgender people use. They found that 72% of women said that they were very or quite comfortable with a transgender woman using a female toilet, right? So when we're talking about like trans women, like being in a changing room or something like you just described, right? I mean, like practically we could do a couple things like, you know, we could also impose like single changer stalls, right? We could do other things to like those are things that are easy enough to do, right? Like we, once upon a time, like we as nations impose like certain accommodations for people who are handicapped. We can do the same thing for trans people. And then also like, and then secondly, like there's no empirically validated concerns, right? Like, of course, people will cite like the one-off crazy ass trans person or person who adopts the label, right? Like that's usually the counter argument, is that people will cite like one-off instances of like crazy people doing outlandish things and use that as an argument against these certain kinds of protections. But the thing is, like, logically speaking, well, first, like, this is not a widespread issue. And then secondly, just like logically, and, you know, like we can just evaluate that on its merits. Having a law against having someone go into a bathroom or a changing room, if their intention is to go in and harass or rape someone, is not going to prevent them from harassing or raping someone if they're already going to do it, right? Like imposing a law to prevent another person from breaking a law doesn't exactly make sense. And all that you're going to end up doing is harming people who actually follow the law, right? So yeah, because there's no because this is not a widespread issue in the slightest, because people largely don't really care, and because like it doesn't really make sense to impose the laws, I would make the argument that that we should not impose laws restricting trans people in places like especially like we're talking about trans women. Usually trans men aren't included in these discussions, caveat. But like we should not impose laws against trans women being allowed in women's changing rooms, restrooms, etc. Because also, like, mind you, that's going to really come back to hurt me, because like I'm not sure, like, again, like we're friends, we already had some discussion early on. I would not do well. Yeah, I would not want to be going into any men's changing rooms. That would not be great. That would be a bad time for me. That would be a bad time.
That would be very uncool.
Yeah,
I'm right there with you.
Okay, cool. So, but does that all make sense? Like I've done the research on this. Certainly, it does make sense. You know, like I'll be the first to say that trans people are not inherently predators. I don't believe that for a second. Thank you.
I do think though that, you know, like trans people in the way that they're operating within society and like the way that people are experimenting with gender transitioning, detransitioning, this is like all a very relatively new thing, you know? So, well, you know, maybe 20, yeah.
I mean, like I can comment on that, right? Like a lot of these concerns come from like self-identification laws, right? And whether or not people, like, you can tell me if I'm wrong, right, in representing this, but I assume that one of the major arguments or concerns, at least among people who express views similar to Arielle, is in like the best faith sense that people will take advantage of self-identification systems. Would that be accurate to say?
I think it's possible.
Okay, so I just want to.
I think it's possible. I just know that, and this is, you know, this. I know you're not a fan of subjective arguments, but this just kind of goes back to like my anecdotal experience as someone growing up. You know, assigned female or whatever. This is like really weird for me to share on stream. Like I I know that that age, like young or like really vulnerable, like teenage girls, just girls, like if I, and this is kind of like why I'm like okay with bathrooms, but like the locker room thing kind of throws me off. Like if I was like a young 5-year-old girl and I was in a locker room and I was suddenly like exposed to like this grown person's penis, like that probably would have been pretty traumatic for me. Like that's just me honestly speaking. And like that's like I guess like where my concern comes from is I do believe that segregated spaces are important, and like my fear is becoming completely and ultimately blurred. Like, you know,
So can I comment
like
on
someone
that?
like you, I would
Sure.
absolutely
Go on.
welcome like within my space. But like, you know, like let's say you have someone who hasn't even like really started transition yet that look masculine, for lack of a better term, have a beard, or maybe they shaved, I don't know. If they came into the locker room with me as a 5-year-old girl, I wouldn't feel comfortable with that.
So
It's just me being completely honest.
all right.
Yeah.
So I mean, I can address that on its merits, right? I mean, like first, like again, like I said, most people, like well, most women don't care as much. But like, all right, so acknowledging your personal perspective, right? I'm going to make several arguments. First, I'm going to say that again, there are ways that we could implement this so that it could make everyone happy, especially with the implementation of something like single changer stalls. Because like I'll talk from my own experience, right? I don't know if you saw my transition video, but I used to look pretty. I certainly looked pretty different a couple of years ago, and if not, that's something that
don't
you can
take
look.
this weirdly, but I actually did.
Yeah, so I mean, like,
yeah,
no, and I mean, like, it's public knowledge. I put it out there so people can see, right? Also because you know I want to give some hope to like other trans people because I feel like you know I'm pretty happy with where I'm at and where I came from, and so there was a point in my life. Thank you, appreciate it. But so there was a point where you know like. And again, we're talking about anecdotal evidence. You're using anecdotal evidence. I'm using anecdotal evidence. Back then, I was terrified to be around like any woman's space. I mean, like even today, I'm still like even nowadays, I admit I'm still scared to go into certain women's spaces because there is this much public discussion and public admonishment of trans people, trans women, especially going into women's spaces. It makes me scared that I can go into like a women's changing room or whatever, and that people will like yell at me or call me a freak or whatever, right? Like I'm afraid of that. And so, but over the course of my transition, there were this fear is not as good now. Like nowadays I'm pretty decent with myself, you know, I'm pretty comfortable in my own sense of self and how, you know, and being in women's spaces, like I'm pretty good. But like you know, when I was started, I was terrified, right? And not only that, like especially like I think that the most terrifying part of transition for me, and this, you know, happens to a lot of trans people, is when you get into sort of the weird in-between space where you've been on HRT and you've been through enough where you don't necessarily look like a guy, but you don't necessarily look like a girl either. And so going into any space, anytime, ever becomes very anxiety driven, right? And so I do agree. And so like what I try to do, what I always try to advocate for is a policy or a way to implement certain things which are going to be most comfortable for everyone, right? I think that, again, like single changing rooms are a great innovation. Like, for example, when I was transitioning, and this will be my privilege showing a little bit, but I used to go to this place called Orange Theory Fitness. If you're not familiar, they are a place with they're a fitness chain with exclusively single stall changing rooms and restrooms, right? That's all that they have, you know? And it actually works out great because they literally don't have any gender, like none of the bathrooms and changing rooms have any specific gender. People just kind of use whatever, and it works out great. And it was awesome for me because I didn't have to worry. Like I could go to a workout place and I didn't have to worry about like other people judging my body or me being uncomfortable or making anyone else uncomfortable, right? And so like, again, like and that's what I want to make sure that we're doing, right? Because like when we start imposing laws which prevent people categorically from being able to enter a space like that, are you going to stop like maybe the one out of a million predator who's taking advantage of like who's taking advantage of the label of being trans? Yeah, you will, but you're going to cause a lot more harm to the average person. And that's my concern. And not only that, but like on sort of like the legal part of it, self-identification laws have existed in the US for like forever. We've had protections like for example, do you have a certain religious affiliation?
I consider myself to be spiritual.
Okay.
But I grew up in a Christian household.
Okay, cool. So how do you prove to me that you are spiritual?
You know, just by me telling you I'm spiritual.
Yeah, exactly. And how do your parents or your family prove to us that they are Christian?
By the nature of them saying that they're Christian.
And we acknowledge that in America, we have protections under the First Amendment for having certain religious views and protections against discrimination on the basis of those views, right?
Yes.
Well, considering that our society has existed for so long without people taking advantage of this and like burning civilization to the ground, we know that self-identification laws can work just fine, right? And I get that like it's a little scary in this sense, and maybe there are people who have taken advantage of it like on the margins of society, and it is all new. But there are ways to be able to implement them in such a way. Like another very clear example is that in the state of Maryland, we've actually had protection on the basis of gender identity for like over 100 years, right? And amazingly, it's not caused any major issues. You don't have problems of like trans predators going around and raping women in the bathroom, right? Like it's not a widespread issue because this is like the only thing that it's done to do, right? And a reason why it exists is because Baltimore has a long history of like people, trans people, like we you know, it's something else to talk about. But like these laws have not created like this problem of trans predators going in and like raping people, right? Like it's a non-issue. And if we want to, you know, prosecute, or if we want to implement this, if we want to implement these sort of things like changing rooms and whatnot in like a different way, then I think that's fine. But to say that this is a problem when it's not is just to make a law with only the function of harming people who just want to change your pee. Does that make sense?
You know, yeah, it does make sense, and I'm really glad that you framed it the way in which you did. Because I guess let me put it this way: like, if we were, oh gosh, someone's at the door. If we were to, how do I say this? Like we have society set up in a certain way, you know, like we have men's bathrooms, women's bathrooms that are set up in however way. Maybe there's changing rooms, maybe there's not. Like, if we were to, I guess, implement transgender laws based on the setup accommodations that we already have, I think there would be potentially some discrepancies. But like,
you're getting a lot of crinkling on your end.
We just need to.
We're hearing a lot of static from your end. It only comes up sometimes. Okay, yeah,
that's right outside my apartment.
Okay, I just wanted to bring your attention. I didn't want to interrupt you, but go ahead. Okay,
can you hear me? Okay, I can move to a different part.
You're fine at the moment. I'll let you know if it becomes an issue.
Okay. So yeah, like I feel like as long as like we can update the accommodations that we normally have, you know, where, you know, maybe we have like individual changing stalls, like, yeah, I think that would work. I personally have not heard that argument presented in that way. Like it's more just like, okay, let's like take the system we already have and then just like include, you know, transition people into the mix. That's the part where I'm like, well, would that work for that setup? But what you're saying is we take the setup we have and then maybe make more additional changes and accommodations to make everyone feel comfortable, which I'm totally on board with. But yeah, again, that's,
you might need to move. We're hearing a lot of scratching. You might need to move. Yes, people in chat are commenting about it.
Sorry, guys. Okay.
It might just be a part of your mic.
All the crazy noise.
I'm gonna turn you down just a little bit, Chad. I'm sorry. Let me know if she's too low. I just want to make sure that we're not like killing the ears of chat, of watchers. Her mic is rubbing against her hair by the look of it. Oh, can you move your hair so it's not next to your? That might help it, because your mic is the little thing next, like, so if you look at like the mic cord, yeah, it's that thing. That's your mic. So if you have stuff rubbing against it, yeah. So just be careful. Okay. Anyway, continuing. Yeah. So, and
yeah, I'm done with my point.
It's still all right. I'm gonna turn you down just like when I'm talking, and I'll turn you back up in a second. So essentially, and mind you, like that is a way to implement a solution. The biggest concern that I want to address, right, because the way that these arguments are usually implemented is trans women are predators, we shouldn't allow them, and because, or you know, some people might feel like discomfort, and because of those two things, we just categorically shouldn't allow trans women into women's spaces or restrooms or changing rooms, etc. Right? And because, and like mind you, like I don't necessarily argue against like creating like hybrid accommodations for people. What I do argue against is like simplifying the argument so much that we end up harming a lot of people who just want to be or whatever, right? That's just basically reiterating it. I'm not saying that to disagree necessarily with anything that you say. It's just that like I want to make sure that the argument, as it could be presented in good faith, is not taken in such a way as to harm other people. Does that make sense? Like if you put the argument into a vacuum, I don't necessarily disagree with that on the merits. It's just when you take it to imply something further, specifically something which excludes trans people, that's when I start taking issue with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense, and I agree. Yeah, I mean, you're speaking about it from, I mean, you have a completely different life than I do, so yeah, absolutely, that makes sense.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
so,
I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah. All right, so the last, or there's two more, so we can talk about them differently. Okay. I'm not sure if this kind of touches on what we just talked about. You made the argument initially that in some instances, cis female issues clash with trans issues. So where's that clash exactly? I hear this argument a lot, but I do not know where it exists.
Certainly. I think that kind of goes back to when I was talking about language and how we speak about our experiences. And like, for example, like the word woman being redefined and maybe like evolving into something different than it used to be before. Like, for example, like the whole thing with J.K. Rowling, I know that you approach what she says as exactly what she says and exactly like what the definitions of the words she's using mean. And I get that. And yeah, again, maybe I'm looking at it subjectively, but here, give me one moment to pull up a quote by her.
I mean, like, the main issue I've taken with her publicly at this point is that she tweeted out that she says that trans identity is a form of conversion therapy. That's probably been like the biggest thing I've quoted her as. Like, I haven't done, I think, a specific video covering her tweets. I've let other people do that. So I don't know necessarily as much, but like when she says something like trans identity is a form of conversion therapy, I think that's pretty bad.
Yeah, that's pretty bad if she states it in the sense of like all cases.
Hey, if someone wants to go find that tweet, I think I retweeted it, so it shouldn't be too hard. If someone wants to get that so I can bring it up, then you can go ahead. But yeah, like that's so far like the biggest. I mean, like there are other criticisms. I'm not saying I don't have other criticisms to the thing that she said. I'm just saying that like I haven't made it a public issue because I want, like when I address someone's arguments, I make sure to go through them and to research and to, really, really go through and dig and make sure that what I'm saying I know to be empirically validated, right? So this is not me saying I necessarily disagree with the things that J.K. Rowling has said, just that I haven't done the research yet to specifically respond to some of the things that she said, other than just that, like, I maybe this is just me. I do not think that saying, I think it's pretty apparent that saying that, like, trans identity is a form of conversion therapy is pretty bad. I would define that as, like, objectively transphobic according to the definition we talked about earlier.
Now, if she were to reword that, would it be bad? If she were to say like, trans identity can be used as a form of conversion therapy, would that be better?
It's hard to talk and I want to say it's hard. Here's what I'll say. First, like the argument kind of flops on its face, right? Oh, hold on. I think that someone just gave me the link to it. Yeah, so what she said was, many, myself included, believe we are watching a new kind of conversion therapy. Oh, hold on, I'll pull that on my stream. Many, myself included, believe we are watching a new kind of conversion therapy for young gay people who are being set on the lifelong path of medicalization that may result in the loss of their fertility and/or sexual function. All right, that's one thing that she tweeted out. Now, I would say that...
You disagree with that?
Yeah, I very strongly disagree with that for a couple of reasons. Yeah, I can go ahead. So the first reason I disagree with that is like the idea kind of flops on itself. The idea that a parent might be homophobic to the point where they don't want their kids to be like gay or lesbian or bi or whatever. And so their alternative is, oh, well, you know what I'm going to do because I'm homophobic and I don't want my kid to be gay? I'm going to convert them into being trans, right? Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, it doesn't make sense that a person is going to be like homophobic but not transphobic, right? Often the two are very interlinked and often one leads consequentially to the other, right? So like that, the logic kind of flops on its face. And also like there's like the medical scientific consensus that like, and we can go over like all the research and all the studies on this, but like children are not being like, for however much people might try to fearmonger it, people like children are not being like convinced that they're trans. They're not trying to be like, they're not being goaded into believing something that they're not. They're like, all that's happening is that when children, and again, we can go over the studies if you really want the evidence for this, children are like, what will normally happen is that a child may express, hey, I have some beliefs that, you know, I might be trans for whatever reason. The parents are like, okay, let's take you to a medical professional and let's get you evaluated. They go to a psychiatrist or a therapist, and they go through a rigorous form of therapy to like validate whether or not they are trans, or kind of like your experience, just kind of flirting around with the idea, right? If they are at such an age where puberty might be a thing or is about to begin, then doctors might prescribe like puberty blockers, which have been shown time and time again to be safe and completely reversible if they are taken off them, right? Like it, and essentially what that does is it gives a child like the ability to just like postpone puberty to think about it for another couple of years, right? Like it's like, like that way, if a child gets to like 16, after they've been on puberty blockers for a couple of years, you know, they can either be like, oh yeah, I'm for sure trans, I'm going to keep going and I'm going to go on like hormones or HRT. Or maybe they're like, actually, I tried this out and, you know, I actually feel kind of comfortable with what I was assigned at birth. Yeah. And then they come off blockers and, you know, they just go about their merry way. Puberty picks up where it left off, right? That's all that's happening with kids, right? Like that's like doctors are not prescribing surgery or anything. Yeah.
That's the ideal situation, but I mean, I don't know how much exploring you've done, but there is a growing community on YouTube of people coming forward saying that they transitioned, realized it was not right for them. They had other underlying medical things that they were dealing with, and they've detransitioned. Like that, that is something that's happening.
I'm aware that people detransition, but there's also, all right, so I have all the studies, right? There's also studies on the reason why people detransition, and the vast majority, and if you want me to pull up the study, I can. I have it. I can get it right in front of me. Like I'm actually looking at them. Actually, no, I already have it in front of me, so we can just talk about it, right? So, oh wait, this is the likelihood risk of detransition. So like the likelihood / risk of detransition, like in the systematic literature review of all peer-reviewed articles published between English in 1991 and June 2017, conducted by Cornell University, they found that regrets following gender transition are extremely rare and have become even rarer as both surgical techniques and social support have improved. Pooling data from numerous studies demonstrates a regret rate ranging from 0.3% to 3.8%. And that regrets are most likely to result from a lack of social support after transition or poor surgical outcomes using older techniques. Furthermore, a survey conducted by the National Center for Transgender Equality found that detransition is largely due to social pressure, and for over 60% of trans people who detransitioned, it was only temporary, right? So like the point is that like, yes, I understand that there are people who detransition, and sure, there might be some of them who did it because like they felt like they made a mistake or whatever, but these are like vast minorities, right? Overwhelmingly, people who transition find positive results, and the people who mostly detransition, like most people who detransition usually do it because they don't get like social support or like they're dissatisfied with the results. It very rarely has to do with the fact that they were trans or thought that they were trans, right?
Yeah, and I agree with that, absolutely. I feel like this is kind of one of those situations where two truths can be true at once, however. Like, I'm trying to find it right now, but there was an article that I was looking up where doctors have actually come forward and said that they've seen like an intense rise of female patients coming into their clinic and wanting to transition. And it's predominantly with like female patients over male patients, and that a lot of them are afraid to say no to them because, you know, there's like trans is so big in our society right now. I'm trying to find the article. But
I mean, like you can share it. You can share it. If you have something else to say, go ahead. But I have a thought on this.
I'm still also willing to like, I guess I kind of have like the proceed with caution sign that comes up when it comes to this situation. And in reference to J.K. Rowling, I do think it's something that we can talk about without delegitimizing other transgender people and saying that, okay, because there's these potentially trans kids who may or may not be trans and we want to look out for them, like separating them from people who actually are trans.
But let's be clear, that's not what she said, right? Like she said that we're watching a new kind of conversion therapy. That's not what, that's like, you're maybe like, if the argument is valid.
For some people it is. Some people that is their situation.
For who though? Like I just showed you. I mean, I just showed you multiple instances where like this is not.
She's not
like,
saying everybody who's trans is going through.
This is saying that basically no one who's trans is going through this. Like it's basically no one. Like the scientific evidence shows that like the amount of people who detransition, again, it's between 0.3 and 3.8%. It's basically no one.
Very few long-term studies that follow.
That was a long-term
adulthood.
That was a long-term study conducted by Cornell University between 1991 and 2017. It's about as reputable as you can get.
And yeah, that's fair, but I just wish we had more information on it all, you know?
Well, I mean, like, and I get that, but that's why studies are being conducted, right? Like, that's why we look at this, right? But what's important is that, like, again, like, it's important to suss out, like, the difference between a fear of something and, like, objective reality about something, right? Now, I will say, right, like, on your specific, like, I do want to talk about the specific point you raised about, like, the doctors who are worried about the more female patients who are coming in, right? Like, that's, I want to propose that, like, there are basically two proposed causes for that. Either A, parents are like trying to convince their kids that they're trans, and I guess this is a conversion therapy argument. Or alternatively, isn't it possible that more people, because being trans is being normalized in society, are just figuring out that they're trans? I mean, like, I just want to ask you, is that even a possibility?
I think both can be true at the same time.
Well,
I think it's both, honestly.
Okay, so why do you think it's both? Is what I'm asking. Like, why do you, like, what, based on what do you think it's both?
I don't know. Like, I've watched a lot of videos of like people's stories online and how they describe themselves, and
okay, but I mean, like, that's like, we know that's anecdotal evidence, right?
I know, but it's still like it's happening, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. And to say like it's not is just not true. Like, it is something that happens. Like, there will be someone who thinks that they're trans, decides to transition, realize that it's not for them for whatever reason, and then transition back. But at the same time, just because those people exist, like, I feel like transition for other people is exactly what they need to like live a fulfilling, happy life. Like, I mean, like, everyone's different, you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and I mean, like, I feel, or I mean, like, I can respond to that, right?
Why does one have to negate the other, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at.
In a sense, I don't necessarily disagree. I mean, in any medical profession, there's going to be a degree of error, but we know what that degree of error is, right? Like, we know that this is like when we're talking about this is something that happens so rarely that the medical community largely regards it as a rounding error, right? Like, if it does happen, it's not because there's some conspiracy by parents to try and convince their kids that they're trans, right? Or at least there's no evidence to suggest that empirically. There might be a fear that people have of it, but there's no evidence to support that other than just like anecdotal one-off instances, right? And so but
I have a feeling as time goes on, we might end up seeing more of those cases. That's just me guessing, though. Like, that's not based on
if we get to that point, like if we keep seeing these sorts of things, and if we start getting studies which empirically show that this is a measurable phenomena, then yeah, obviously then we need to have some reform in the medical community, right? Like I can agree with that. If this is an issue, then like if this is a widespread issue, then yeah, of course we need to resolve it, because we don't want to be prescribing people medications or procedures that they shouldn't have. Right, or that medical professionals believe that they shouldn't have, right? But like right now, there's just the only evidence that exists for that is like purely anecdotal, and it's very similar to the situation you have with people worrying about like trans predators. Is there evidence of like people abusing a label of trans to try and take advantage of like whatever self-identification system? Yes, but it's largely anecdotal, and the empirical evidence, the current academic literature on those subjects shows that like the vast majority of trans people, whether it's for changing rooms or bathrooms or whatever, just want to pee or do their thing. And same likewise for people who transition, like the vast majority of people who transition, just like they're just doing their thing and they end up completely satisfied with the results. So
I mean, even if it is anecdotal, do you think it's wrong for J.K. Rowling to at least be concerned about that?
There's a difference between being concerned and saying something in such an inflammatory way that it can objectively cause harm to other people, right? This is why I look at the objective definition of what it means to be trans, because I believe that by saying these things with such a large platform, that she is normalizing this belief in society without any empirical evidence to show it, right? Like this has 19,000 likes and 6.7K retweet. Actually, hold on. Can we? Oh wait, this is on the Twitter app.
But who determines what's transphobic and what's not?
Well, something we already talked about the definition, right? Something which has a materially negative effect on the trans person by virtue of the fact that they are trans. By normalizing this belief, by having such a large platform and tweeting out this belief, she is normalizing this kind of belief in society, and that runs a harm because it introduces a belief into more people that's not empirically validated and ends up like, and may cause people to like, whether it's parents questioning whether or not their children are actually who they say they are, or whether it's friends of people who are trans who begin to question them, or maybe it's just like a random person who sees, someone trans on the street and just thinks that they're, not who they say they are, right? Like there could be a number of negative effects of this, right? And I would say that because of that, and because it's not empirically validated, and because it's targeted at trans people, and specifically because it has a materially negative effect on trans people by virtue of the fact that they are trans, I would say it's transphobic. Like again, like I'm not trying.
I mean, some trans people don't find any offense with what she said, so I guess that's like where I'm kind of getting confused.
Yeah, but who are you? Who are you talking about with that?
There's always an opinion out there that hurts you. Like there's always every opinion is going to hurt someone. Like that's just the nature of how we live. We're all human beings who think extremely differently from one another. Which is again why I go back to what we had mentioned earlier, where you asked me that hypothetical, like, if someone was saying racist stuff and then people who follow said racist person go out and commit racist crimes. Just for context, I am half Black before I say this. Like, I don't think they're the ones being directly harmful. I feel like that's just her expressing her freedom of speech. And I mean, you can agree with it, you can disagree with it, but like at the end of the day, it's an opinion, and you can either allow that opinion to hurt you or not directly.
Okay, so I mean, we can talk about a couple. I can talk about a couple things there. There are a couple arguments that you just made that I can address if you want.
Okay.
So the first one, right? It goes to whether or not someone just expressing an opinion is reason enough in and of itself to respect that person's opinion, right? So this is actually interesting because it goes to our law on what free speech is, right? So according to the Supreme Court in Brandenburg v. Ohio, a couple things, right? First, it's important to recognize that the First Amendment does not give anyone a complete unabridged freedom to say whatever they want, right? There are limits. Two, one of those limits is when people make specific and actionable statements intended to incite harm against a specific group of people. And three, if hate speech is not prohibited, for example, if it's very general, then the current opinion of the court is to have the remedy be other speech criticizing the original hate speech. This has to do with John Stuart Mill's concept of the free marketplace of ideas, right? Which is weird to me because, like, often this idea is cited. Like, the free marketplace of ideas is cited by conservatives who will use it as a reason for people to not criticize them, when in fact, like, it's specifically the reason why they can be criticized by other people, especially in large numbers. So with this in mind, let me run you through some hypotheticals. I've used them before, but they're good for this purpose, right? So if a misogynist believes that a woman's place is in the kitchen and I do not, does the fact that we disagree mean that I should respect that person's opinion?
Repeat that one more time.
Sure. If a misogynist believes a woman's place is in the kitchen and I do not, does the fact that we disagree by itself mean that I should respect that person's opinion?
And so when you say misogynist, this person is like just a straight up woman hater.
Yeah, this person believes a woman's place is in the kitchen.
You don't have to respect their opinion, no, but
well, I mean, like we can agree with that, right? Like I do not have to respect their opinion by virtue of the fact that we disagree, right? Like I don't have to respect it.
Oh.
Okay. If a racist if a racist believes in slavery and I do not, the fact that we disagree does not mean that I have to respect their opinion, right?
Oh.
Cool. If a Nazi believes that we should kill all the Jews and I do not, the fact that we disagree does not mean that I have to respect their opinion, right?
Oh.
Yeah. So let's be clear, right? The reason I bring up these hypotheticals is because these people are all wrong, not by virtue of the fact that we disagree, but because they are openly advocating for materially adverse treatment of the people that we're talking about, whether it's women or black people or the Jews, right? And pursuant to the logic of John Stuart Mill and the Supreme Court, the correct response to people voicing these kinds of opinions is for other people to criticize those opinions openly in the free marketplace of ideas. That's what we are told to do. When someone goes out and says something or voices just their opinion, then like the correct response according to the court and according to John Stuart Mill is to go out and openly criticize that person in response. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So and I can go on to the next argument, right? Because there's actually two arguments, right? The other one is like whether or not people are responsible for what their fans say. But like we can talk about this more if you want to.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that people should not criticize J.K. Rowling. I don't think that's what I was trying to get at. I think I was trying to get at, like, I can see how, like, she has the concerns that she does. Like, I can understand her point of view, I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
Right, but again, going back to what we said earlier, we understand that the concerns that she has are not empirically validated, right? Like, most people are not worried about women in changing rooms. Most of the time when people transition, it's not because of, like, some form of, like, conversion therapy or whatever. Like we like
I'm
that's
wrong, but I don't think she mentions anything about changing rooms in her tweet.
Okay, not changing rooms. So talking about the young people, the children transitioning in conversion therapy, right? Like we know that the current empirical evidence shows that like that's not an issue, right? Again, that's not saying that there might not be like some other phenomenon out there.
Some people though, but like yeah, but what's wrong with being concerned about that? You know?
Well, it's concerning
what's
when
wrong
you get
with wanting to protect your child.
Well, here's the reason why, and this is the other reason why, right? Talking about specifically like content creators, or when content creators or larger figures are responsible for their fan bases harming other people, if they only generally talk about a target demographic. So first, are you familiar with stochastic terrorism as a term?
So when you, sorry, before you ask that one, so when you said that, you are implying that J.K. Rowling is responsible for how other people act based on what she tweets?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So have you ever heard of the term stochastic terrorism?
No, actually, I've not.
Okay. So I'm just going to talk about a little bit of scientific consensus and data. So first, a study conducted, and this also has to do with Arielle, right? So we can bring them both into this sort of argument. So a study conducted by the Data and Research Institute found focused on the effects of what's called the Alternative Influence Network, or AIN. This is an assortment of alleged scholars, media pundits, and internet celebrities who use YouTube to promote a range of political positions, from mainstream versions of libertarianism and conservatism, all the way to overt white nationalism. Content creators in the AIN claim to provide an alternative media source for news and political commentary. They function as political influencers who adopt the techniques of brand influencers to build audiences and to sell them on far-right ideology. What the study says is that the main objective defining characteristics of content creators in the AIN are A, establishing an alternative sense of credibility based on relatability, authenticity, and accountability, and B, cultivating an alternative social identity using the image of a social underdog or countercultural appeal. You can see a lot of people who are more conservative do this, right? Talk about like, oh, we're the counterculture, we're the rebels, we're the like. That's one of the main hallmarks of their appeal. They also say that when viewers engage with this content, it is framed as a lighthearted, entertaining, rebellious, and fun sort of thing. This fundamentally obscures the impact that these issues have on vulnerable and underrepresented populations, specifically the LGBT community, women, immigrants, and people of color. The reason this is important is because according to dictionary.com, stochastic terrorism is the public demonization of a person or group resulting in the incitement of a violent act, which is statistically probable, but whose specifics cannot be predicted. They go on to say that the word stochastic in everyday language means random, and terrorism here refers to violence motivated by ideology. They go on to describe the idea behind stochastic terrorism. First, a leader or organization or public figure uses rhetoric in the mass media against a group of people. Two, this rhetoric, while hostile or hateful, doesn't explicitly tell someone to carry out an act of violence against that group of people, but a person feeling threatened is motivated to do so as a result. Three, the individual act of political violence can't be predicted as such, but that violence will happen is much more probable thanks to the rhetoric. And four, this rhetoric is thus called stochastic terrorism because of the way it incites random violence. So the analysis, putting this all together, like we're putting together the sandwich, right, is that by posturing themselves as just expressing concerns or just voicing their opinions, AIN YouTubers and other public figures have been shown to influence the beliefs and behaviors of their fan base. Although they may not specifically call for harm to be committed against the groups that they discuss, by normalizing negative views about the targeted groups, they increase the likelihood that their fans will adopt those views and will subsequently commit specific acts of harm against members of those groups. So, content... I mean,
there's no way... Yeah.
So, I mean, like, I get what you're saying. I understand that, like, you might not think that people are... that like larger people, larger content creators, larger influencers might not be responsible for the actions of their audiences. But if they specifically even vaguely talk about a group in a certain negative way, we have evidence to show that like people will go out and act on those beliefs in more specific ways, right? It doesn't really matter if someone is just voicing a concern because their audience will adopt those views and do things on their own.
Yeah, I mean, I just have a very difficult time believing that, you know, someone is going to like go out there and commit terrorism on trans people completely based on J.K. Rowling's tweet. And even let's say they do, like, there's no way to detect that J.K. Rowling's tweet is like the direct cause of that.
Well, I mean, it's not even necessarily terrorism, right? What the evidence shows is just that larger people can have severe influences on their fans or their fan base up to killing someone, right? Like, it can be small, it can be minimal, and it can be pretty extreme.
Trying to cancel J.K. Rowling, so I mean,
that's like, because
not a lot of people are on her side.
Well, that's because that's what the concern is, right? Like she might influence. Let's say that she influences just. All right, we're just pulling a number out of there. Let's say that she influences 100 people with this belief, all right? And let's say that 90 of them go out and, you know, they don't do something, like, deadly, but they go out and they, like, end up insulting a trans person because of what she says. Well, then let's say that 10 of those people, the other 10 people, end up going out and doing something... Or let's say that 9 of them end up going out and beating up a trans person, and 1 of them ends up going out and murdering a trans person, right? Like, yes, she didn't, like, her speech didn't end up causing, like, 100 deaths of trans people, but, like, 1 death is too many, and I would argue that the others should be avoided.
Why is that concern valid and not the concern of her mentioning that she's worried about...
Because one is empirically valid...
And then transitioning. Why is that concern valid and the other's not?
Because there are studies to support the former and not the latter, or the latter and not the former.
There are people who have transitioned who ended up detransitioning.
But we've already talked about how that's just anecdotal evidence. There's no wide empirical study to be able to show that.
The same can be said for the people who go out and murder trans persons.
No, we have empirical, like, here's the empirical evidence. Like, we have the empirical evidence to show that this is a widespread issue. That's the difference. One of them is an empirically validated issue and the other is not.
J.K. Rowling's tweet is a widespread issue. There's evidence to support that people are going out and killing people based on her tweet.
No, but we do know. No. But we have, no, I'm not saying that we know with certainty. I'm saying it increases the likelihood that people will go out and harm trans people. That's what it does. It increases a likelihood. We don't know with certain what effect it has, but we know that there is a measurable phenomena where this can and probably did have a measurable effect on the lives of trans people by virtue of the fact that they were trans.
I mean, maybe, but like, let's just say that's the case. Are you saying that we should censor J.K. Rowling's tweets because of that? Because I feel like it gets into nitty-gritty territory when you start dictating.
I'm not saying I'm not saying to censor her. I'm not saying to censor her. What I'm saying is this is what what I'm saying is that this is what justifies the response that she has received, right? When you have a lot of people calling out in overwhelming numbers that she is transphobic for saying these things, not only are they justified under John Stuart Mill's concept of the free marketplace of ideas and under the Supreme Court precedent that we have, but also that we have a specific measurable phenomena that shows why it is objectively harmful. That's why. Like, I'm not saying that her tweet should be taken down or that her speech should be censored or whatever, but it should be called out because it has a substantial and empirically measurable risk of causing harm. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot more sense, yeah.
Okay, so that's all I'm saying.
That
this is about, so I have another debate that actually I'm a little bit late for, but that's essentially the argument, right? Like, I'm not trying to say that we should censor J.K. Rowling. She can say whatever she wants. She can say whatever she wants. But like, I am going to put the warning label on the cigarette saying, hey, if you say these things, expect a pretty serious pushback. Right? That's all I'm saying. She's a free woman. Yeah. She can do whatever she wants. She can, like, a free country, free world, yada, yada. But like, I feel justified because of the aforementioned data and reasons in saying the things I have, at least in this case about her and similarly about Arielle. Again, we can't get into all the nitty gritty, but like for similar reasons.
You're speaking from the perspective of a trans person, and I absolutely respect that. In regards, I think I'm just speaking from the perspective of someone who grew up like her. So I guess that's kind of where I was coming from, where I can kind of see like what she's getting at. I might not agree with the way she worded it. I feel like she was kind of clumsy in how she went about it. But yeah, like I just feel like it's two different perspectives and both can be true at the same time. That's just kind of where my stance is on that, I guess.
All right. Well, hey, do you want to say anything else? Any last memes for us? Anything that you want to say? Shout out yourself, so on and so forth?
Say any last memes for us?
Yeah, any last memes? Yeah. I'm sorry. That's what other streamers say. I'm apparently adopting it. When you're around people long enough, you know how you start to like adopt the things that they say. I guess that I'm doing that now.
That's funny.
You have any last words?
I wish I became prepared. I don't want to like call out myself or like advertise myself because this is not something I really discuss on a day-to-day basis, but I just wanted to say thank you very kindly for allowing me to be on your stream. And, even though like I came in maybe not agreeing with things that you believe, like you were still very gracious having me on here. And I really appreciate you for that. And I will also say that like, I feel like I'm a little less, like I'm holding on to my beliefs a little less tightly now. Like I'm starting to see, other perspectives that maybe I didn't consider after this discussion with you. And yeah, just thanks for having me.
No problem. Well, hey, take care, Marcy. Bye.
All right, take care, Riley.